Sister Sajida emails that she was planning to go for Hajj, but now the government has announced that the Hajj has been cancelled, and so she had saved up some money. Is she sinful in taking that money and using it for her other expenses, given the fact that she is saying their situation is not as financially strong as it was because of the COVID crisis? And also we have Brother Taha emailing, asking my opinion about, is this something permissible? Is it allowed to stop people for coming for Hajj? So this question will be about the Hajj regulations that have come and the fiqhi issues pertaining to that.
وما أرسلنا من قبلك إلا رجالا نوحي إليهم فاسألوا أهل الذكر إن كنتم لا تعلمون.
I'll start with the second question first, regarding whether it is permissible or not. In the end of the day, we have to deal with what we are given. I'm not in charge of this decision. It is the Ministry of Hajj and the Ministry of Health that has decided this. And I am sympathetic to it overall. I understand that it is not the wisest at this stage to have millions of people from across the globe come together. The question of whether this has ever occurred in the past or not, well, it is true that in Islamic history, there have been a number of times where the Hajj has been severely impeded. For example, in the year 317 Hijrah, there was an internal revolt, a fanatical sect called the Qaramita, or the Karamatians, the Qaramita. They were a very extreme fringe sect that were on the esoteric, branches of Islam, and they had very bizarre beliefs that they were not considered mainstream Muslims, and they attacked the Kaaba during Hajj in the year 317. Very tragic state of affairs. They actually, believe it or not, destroyed sections of the Kaaba. They hijacked the black stone, the Hajar Aswad, and they took it to their place in the region of Bahrain, and they built a false Kaaba over there. And so for around 20 years, there was no black stone. In fact, in that Hajj in 317, very tragic story, they actually massacred the pilgrims in front of the Kaaba, and they, a'udhu billah, they stuffed the well of Zamzam with their dead bodies. These are stories that a lot of times nobody's even heard of, but these are well-known incidents in our Islamic history, and they reigned havoc and terror for a number of years. And so after that year, when the people heard about this, they were terrified to even go. So for a number of years, the Hajj dwindled to a very small quantity. As well, multiple times, there were a number of civil wars that took place in the Muslim world that prevented large caravans from coming. In the 3rd and the 4th centuries, multiple times, specific regions in the Muslim world were not able to send their Hujjaj. Obviously, in the Mongol invasion as well, when the Mongols invaded Genghis Khan, when he invaded, the entire Muslim world was disrupted, and for a number of years, the Hajj was very much symbolic. Very small groups of people came. Also in 1798, when Napoleon invaded Egypt, there were no Hujjaj that went from the entire North African region. So imagine from Morocco all the way, because the Hujjaj would go through Egypt when they come to the Hijaz, to Mecca and Medina. And so when Napoleon invaded, it disrupted the entire, one of the major arteries of Hajj was completely disrupted. Now Hajj went on, but it was not anywhere near the numbers that they were accustomed to. As well, throughout Islamic history, there have been a number of pandemics, or rather I should say cholera outbreaks, because that's usually what occurred, is that there were a number of deadly bouts of cholera, and these affected the Hujjaj. The famous Egyptian historian Al-Jabarti, he mentions that in the year 1831 CE, basically 150 years ago, 170 years ago, 3/4 of the Hujjaj died in Hajj because of an outbreak of cholera. And in 1865, the Hajj killed over almost 20,000 people, and in those days Hajj was around 80,000, so like 1/4 of the Hujjaj. So basically within 30 years, 3/4 and then 1/4 of the Hujjaj were wiped out. And by the way, in 1865, the Hajj actually caused, meaning the people that were interacting in Hajj, when they returned back, it caused this cholera outbreak to spread across the globe, so much so that they even said that eventually that outbreak even reached the Western world and America. And of course, at this point in time, the British and the French are ruling large segments of the Muslim world. So they're taking charge of the Hajj in the 18th, 19th century. And it's interesting that in the 19th century, meaning the 1800s, after the mutiny, after the British Raj in 1856, 1857, when the British took over, the British had to organize the Pilgrims of India, which was the largest group or one of the largest groups of pilgrims. And because the British are in charge, they have to have a ministry of Hajj, believe it or not. They actually had a person stationed in Jeddah, a British, person, non-Muslim, that's in charge of the Hujjaj and monitoring them. And because cholera was one of the biggest problems, so there were attempts to curb, the quantity of Hujjaj. And of course, this caused a huge backlash because the Muslims felt, who are you to tell us whether we can go or not? And the British felt that, we are in charge of you and you're affecting our ships because you're coming on our ships. Your cholera is going to affect all of us. And so it was, there were always tensions here and there. This isn't the first time this tension is taking place. And an interesting incident took place in 1899. That the famous Rashid Rida, the great alim of the last century, he discusses that in 1899, because of the spread of cholera, French authorities attempted to curtail the Hajj. They don't have the right to ban, but they're ruling over countries. They're ruling over North Africa. They have sections of Egypt and whatnot. And so they attempted to curb the Hajj from their own parties. They can't stop it in Mecca and Medina, but they can stop it in their own lands, or the colonized lands, I should say, that are ruled by these colonial powers. And the French attempted to ban their peoples from going for Hajj, and this caused a huge outbreak because again the French were invaders, the French were colonizers, and the Muslim ulama felt, who are you to tell us that we cannot go for Hajj? And this issue reached the Grand Mufti of Egypt, and great ulama gathered together in 1899 and they discussed whether the French ban should be effective or not. And Shaykh Rashid Rida, he talks about this in one of his writings in Majalat al-Manar. And he mentions that the Rais Majlis al-Nudhar and the Qadhi and the Shaykh al-Azhar and the Mufti Dar Misriya, they came together. Amongst them, he said, with Shaykh Abdul Rahman al-Nawawi and Shaykh Abdul Qadir al-Rafi'i and others of that era. And they all agreed that the authorities in France had no right to tell the Muslims whether they should or they should not go for Hajj. And they said that just because there's a cholera outbreak in the Hijaz, that this should not stop the Muslims from going for Hajj, and whoever wants to go for Hajj, even if there is a sickness, then they should be allowed to go. Now, this having said this, it should also be mentioned that Shaykh Rashid and others, they mentioned that the French, they had a sinister motive. It wasn't the health of the Hujjaj. In 1899, there was a lot of anti-British and anti-French sentiment going on. And there were people that wanted to get rid of these colonial powers, but they weren't allowed to meet in France or in the French occupied territories. And so Mecca became a safe haven for political dissidents across the globe to come together and to hatch plans to basically be anti-British and anti-French. And so the notion was, they're not stopping the Muslims from going for Hajj, they're stopping political dissidents from meeting up. And so that was the goal there. In any case, all of this is down history lane. And by the way, just FYI, 100 years ago, as you should all know, this is something by now everybody should know, that the closest pandemic that we should be familiar with is that which took place in 1917 and 1918 in the Spanish influenza, which was global, and it was from the same strain as the COVID-19, the same strain of virus that is there in the Spanish influenza is now present as well in the COVID. And in 1917 and 1918, when the Sharifs of Mecca, they ruled over that region, they did not prevent the Hujjaj from coming, even though the numbers were less than usual. Now, all of this is history. In the end of the day, I'm not in charge. It wasn't my decision. Whether I agree or not doesn't change the fact that Hajj has temporarily been suspended for people outside the country. As for those inside the country, there will be a very small amount. One report said 1,000, one report said 10,000 people, just a symbolic amount that the Hajj will take place. It does appear to me, and Allah knows best, that this might be the first time in all of Islamic history that the Hajj has been curtailed in this manner. But do realize as well that the reason why it is even possible for this to happen is because of the nation states and the visas and the transportations. I mean, you couldn't have stopped the Hajj 500 years ago even if you wanted to. Hujjaj would come from Morocco. They wouldn't know what's going on. I mean, there's going to take 3 months for them to get to Mecca. Visas and stamping them, all of this is now modern stuff, you know. So getting on the airplane, making sure you have your paperwork. You couldn't have done this even 200 years ago. So this notion of is there precedence or not, as I have mentioned in my previous lectures about this COVID crisis, it is not my philosophy that we need precedence in the first place. To be brutally honest, I am not of the mindset that we need a precedent for every single fatwa that is given. As I said in a previous lecture, that this COVID crisis really has demarcated two paradigms from within the scholarly community. It is one paradigm that is completely averse to any change whatsoever, and they're always looking to the past and always looking for precedents, and they're saying who before us allowed this. And I understand and I respect that very philosophically conservative frame of mind. But the flip side is that why are we bound by the views of people 500 years ago, 1,000 years ago, with our utmost respect to them? But our knowledge and our circumstances have changed. And had they been alive right now, it is my belief that they would have taken advantage of the knowledge that we have. So I don't need precedence in this regard. Rather, the scholars of our times, we should not do it single-handedly. Neither me nor any scholar should just break away from the chains of all scholarship. We should always have, groups of ulama, groups of people come together and discuss these modern issues. And by and large, as you're aware, that majority of our scholars of our times, they have agreed to this ban from foreigners to come, because we don't want to exacerbate the situation. We now know how these viruses are spread. We know much more about the transmission and safety mechanisms, and this was not known even 100 years ago. It wasn't known. Even in the Spanish influenza, when it occurred, we didn't know what we know now. And so we want to be safe here, and of the primary pillars of our Sharia is the preservation of life. And as for the Hajj, it is not being stopped. There will be a group of people that are going to be going. The Hajj will take place, whether it's 1,000, whether it's 10,000. Alhamdulillah, the adhan will be called, people will be in Arafat. And here's the beauty. Our Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, as we're all familiar with, إِنَّمَا الْأَعْمَالُ بِالنِّيَّاتِ وَإِنَّمَا لِكُلِّ امْرِئٍ مَّا نَوَى. All actions will be judged by intentions, and everyone will get what they intended. And so I was intending to go for Hajj. I had a group of 200 people that were going to go with me for Hajj. So many people were intending to go for Hajj. Insha'Allah, be certain that you had the intention. Allah will reward you for that intention. There's a hadith by Abdullah bin Amr al-As. Our Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, إِذَا اشْتَكَى الْعَبْدُ الْمُسْلِمِ, that if the Muslim is sick, Allah Azza wa Jal will say, "Uktubu lahu afdala ma kana ya'mal." Write for him all that he used to do in the best of manners. Go ahead and write it for him. Meaning, the point of the hadith is that suppose you used to pray extra prayers, then you fell sick with a fever, and you weren't able to pray those nafil prayers. Allah will say to the angels, go ahead and write those nafil prayers and give him the maximum reward, just because he had that intention to do, but something came in the way. So here we have as well the intention to go for Hajj, and circumstances came between us and the Hajj. So قَدَّرَ اللَّهُ وَمَا شَاءَ فَعَلَ. Allah decrees, whatever He wills happens. We accept the decree of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and we understand that this was a decision that does make logistical sense. There's no need to prolong this crisis as it is. It has created world havoc. Why should we make it worse? Because you have 3 million people that are going to come, and these are all going to go back to their lands. It is a recipe for disaster. Anybody who has gone for Hajj, and I've been alhamdulillah to more than 15 Hajjs, may Allah accept them or even one of them, but anybody who knows goes for Hajj, you are congested. You're living in tight, cramped quarters. You're going to be in crowds that you've never seen in your life. You're in a tent with 15, 20 people. The restroom facilities. I mean, you are asking for disaster with that congestion. It does not make any sense. This is a global pandemic. Why do you want to prolong and delay the lifting of it? So I understand. Obviously, we're all saddened. I was looking forward to Hajj. I needed a break from all that is going on. I needed to go and make dua to Allah and stand in Arafat. I was looking forward to it. Allah knows I was looking forward to it. قدر الله ما شاء فعل. Allah Azza wa Jal has decreed. So inshallah ta'ala, I'm going to go inshallah next year. And all of you who wanted to go this year, you got the reward, and then try to go next year. Now the question that our sister had was that she had set aside some money, and now most travel agents are able to return partially or fully. And again, this is up to you and the travel agent. If they're not able to return fully, then again, that is their prerogative and business, and you need to go to them and find out what can or cannot be done. That's not a shari'i issue, it's a logistical issue. But the question now comes that she was saying, or she is saying, our sister is saying that she had this money saved up for Hajj. She had intended to spend it for Hajj. Now, the money is there. Whether it was refunded or whether she didn't give the full amount, now she has that money. But she needs that money because the COVID crisis has affected her or her husband's or whatever financial situation. And now she's wondering, is it permissible to utilize that money for her daily expenses? And the response is, there is absolutely no sin on you to utilize this money because circumstances have changed, because the money does not become earmarked and demarcated that you are no longer having access to it. Rather, the circumstances changed, and so the status of the money changes as well. Now, obviously, if you have saved up for this Hajj and you are able to keep this amount for next year's Hajj, then you should do that, because Hajj is obligatory as soon as one is able to go. This is the stronger position. There are two positions in Islamic fiqh: that can you delay Hajj for no reason, or should you do Hajj as soon as you're financially capable? There's a hadith in the Daraqutni, slightly weak, that somebody asked the Prophet ﷺ that when is basically Hajj, you're supposed to go, and he said, Az-zadu wal-rahila. Now the hadith is weak, but some say it is from the Sahaba, the concept is from the Sahaba, and it is something, it makes sense. Az-zadu wal-rahila, it means that you need to have enough money to take care of you on the way and on the way back, and you need to have an animal or circumstance or transportation to take you there as well. So what has happened now is that you had the money, the zad, you had paid for the rahila, for the ride, but now you are saying you need this money. So if you need this money and you need to dip into it, need to take all of it, you cannot pay your rent, or you're having problems with your bills or whatnot, definitely there is no haraj whatsoever, there's no sin whatsoever that you take from this money. And if by next year you are not able to save up enough to go for Hajj, the Hajj has been forgiven for you until you are able to save up, and there is no blame on you whatsoever. La yukallifullahu nafsan illa wus'aha. That the Sharia is not something that is so difficult. So dear sister, do not feel any sense of blame or any sense of haraj is called in Arabic. Do not feel any sense of issue. There's no sin on you to take advantage of your own money for circumstances that have now occurred beyond your control. And if you're able to save up, alhamdulillah. If not, then whenever you can save up, then Hajj will become obligatory upon you. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make it easy for all of us to perform the Hajj inshaAllah ta'ala soon.
يا من أجبت دعاء نوح فانتصر وحملته في فلكك المشحون، يا من أحال النار حول خليله روحا وريحانا بقولك كن